Today on Beyond 6 Seconds.
That's when I came up with the idea for Mogul. What if we had a platform for millions of us to share our obstacles and challenges and struggles, and then from that be able to share our ideas and opportunities amongst each other, and become that much better and stronger together.
Welcome to Beyond 6 Seconds, the podcast that goes beyond the 6-second first impression to share the extraordinary stories and achievements of everyday people. I'm your host, Carolyn Keel. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Tiffany Pham. Tiffany is the founder and CEO of Mogul, an award-winning worldwide platform enabling women to connect, share information, and access knowledge from each other. She coded the first version of Mogul, which now reaches 18 million women per week from over 196 countries. Mogul was named one of the 100 most exciting startups by Business Insider, best website for finding top talent by Inc. magazine, top website for marketing your company online by Forbes, and has been honored by the U.S. House of Representatives, City of Fort Worth, City of New York, and City of Paris. Tiffany was named one of Forbes' 30 Under 30 in media, Business Insider's 30 Most Important Women Under 30 in Technology, Elle Magazine's 30 Women Under 30 Who Are Changing the World, New York Business Journal's Women of Influence winner, and SE Top 100 Social Entrepreneur. And those are just a few of the organizations that have recognized her for her leadership, innovation, and entrepreneurial vision. Tiffany is also an author whose latest book, You Are a Mogul, was published by Simon & Schuster in September. Tiffany, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. So excited to be on.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you on today. So with Mogul, you help women become moguls by giving them unparalleled access to connect and learn from experts and from each other. But what was your own path to becoming a mogul?
I think it definitely was reminiscent to the path that we give to women today on Mogul, connecting and learning from experts and from my peers as well. So what I mean by that is actually my own life story, my own path started from initially my family, learning from them and being inspired by them, by my grandmother especially, who was this amazing woman who in fact was one of the first women to drive a car in Vietnam, who ran businesses across Asia, working to provide others with information access and opportunities. And I wanted to be just like her. So growing up, I dedicated every ounce of my energy and time towards that effort, working to develop skill sets that could enable me to follow in her footsteps. And ultimately, that brought me eventually from Paris, France, where I was initially born, to Plano, Texas, to then on to Yale and Harvard Business School, at which point then I continued to take on opportunities that would enable me to follow my grandmother's footsteps. With the Yale opportunity in particular, what that meant was that I ended up applying to Yale when I had so little funds. I didn't even have the funds to attend or even visit college, to be honest. I actually applied simply because I happened to see Yale in a show called Gilmore Girls, where Roy Gilmore attended Yale. So I ended up applying, and luckily they let me in on scholarship, just like her. And ultimately, I ended up leading the school newspaper, just like her and my grandmother. Subsequently, when I went on to Harvard Business School, I actually applied because I'd seen the school in Legally Blonde. At that time, I thought, wow, this girl's going to Harvard. I'd never seen it in my life. Ended up applying and became one of their youngest students. And then from there, again, just like Elle in the movie, ended up becoming one of the students and so dedicated, to accomplishing this goal I had of fulfilling my promise to my grandmother. So ended up leading media organizations there, and then ultimately working with one of the presidents of BBC, eventually working for one of the presidents of HBO, and then eventually one of the presidents of CBS, back to back to back, as they recommended me to each other. And I ended up then working at CBS then during the day, and then at nights would take on side hustles, whereby I would learn about different aspects of the media industry by working with the vice mayor of Beijing during the nights, working with him to create a venture together that could bridge the cultural gaps between US and China. And then I ended up taking on a third job at nights, producing feature films and documentaries that could further highlight different social issues that needed more global awareness. So I became one of the producers behind the first North American feature film to ever feature a man with Down syndrome in the lead role.
Wow.
So I had all these three jobs at once. And then one day woke up and my phone had exploded with hundreds of letters from all around the world, emails, because that morning I'd been listed on what you mentioned before, the Forbes 30 Under 30 list, one of their first years that they ever published. and no one quite knew what it was. But because my email was available, all of a sudden I was getting hundreds of letters asking me for help and advice, how they could get these 3 jobs too. So I started answering every single letter, 3 pages worth of advice. And they would tell me that my letter had changed their life, that all of a sudden they got that opportunity or interview they never thought would be possible. And so all of a sudden, that's when I came up with the idea for Mogul, realizing to myself, what if we had a platform for millions of us to share our obstacles and challenges and struggles, and then from that, be able to share our ideas and opportunities amongst each other, become that much better and stronger together. And so ultimately at that time, even though I had these 3 jobs, I thought, well, I don't have millions of dollars to hire a team of engineers, but maybe the one final thing I could do to help all these young girls' lives was to teach myself how to code and build this little idea out myself.
Wow.
So every single day I'd work until 3 a.m. and then I would be done with everything and I would teach myself Ruby on Rails. And after a couple of weeks, I built the first version of Mogul and ended up then sending it out to the thousands of young women following me online. And we ended up exploding to 1 million women within our first week, becoming one of the fastest growing platforms for women ever.
Wow, that's incredible. I know you mentioned a couple of movies that inspired you when you were talking about your colleges, but in some ways your life almost sounds like an amazing movie plot as well. And that's just incredible. All the different things that you were involved in and all the different things that you were open to learning and trying, really, it seems like built an incredible skill set and then now resulting in the execution of your vision for Mogul, which is just an amazing platform.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
It's been a tremendous ride for sure.
Wonderful. So tell me about Mogul and why is it important for women to have access to a platform like Mogul?
It's important for women to have access to a platform like Mogul because today the statistics just aren't that pretty. Unfortunately, when you look at what the context is, women right now represent just 10 to 15% of share of voice. That means that when you look at boards, when you look at everything from stories and editorials and op-eds, all of a sudden, unfortunately, when you're reading them, it's 90% of the time males' voices, men voices, and then ultimately 10, 15% of the time women's voices. So Mogul is encouraging women at the early stages of their lives to speak up, to share their ideas, share knowledge, and ultimately accelerate this rate. It's also important because ultimately, as one of the now largest platforms for women worldwide, we have a 1-for-1 model whereby for every dollar Mogul earns, we provide free educational resources to one woman in need through international partners such as the United Nations. And so ultimately, now we're able to provide free educational resources to over 62 million women around the world in this way. Those 62 million would otherwise, unfortunately, not have received educational resources without us, since they're prevented by their societies, literally prevented from attending schools due to their gender. So to this day, it's extremely important to continue finding every way possible to continue providing towards global impact on global education for girls.
Absolutely. And I can just hear your passion for so many different issues that impact women, from education to connection. I know Mogul also has an anti-bullying message around it as well, or just being a safe place to share and learn from each other. That's great.
Oh, absolutely. As a team or even as a platform, whoever you may be to the Mogul community, a user, a team member, you're part of the family. And as a result, that's how we see ourselves. We are a family and we believe in mainly 3 values: being kind, being authentic, being generous. And so as a result, that's how everyone is expected to be: kind, authentic, and generous. That doesn't mean the same opinions. That doesn't mean the same ideas. It means different opinions, different ideas, diverse perspectives. Ultimately, though, always presented with kindness and intelligence and generosity.
That's wonderful. I wish everything was like that in society. What a great goal. As a young child, you made a pretty significant geographic move from Paris, France to Plano, Texas. And I understand that when you moved there, you didn't know any English yet. And I'd love to just understand, what was that experience like and how did that shape the rest of your journey for your career?
What happened at that time was, I suppose it was something that could have been very jolting, but instead, I think it was something that was key to my experience now as an entrepreneur, just experiencing such change and culture shock, what could have been a major challenge, to overcome. But that instead I ended up taking in stride because as a young girl, I thought it to be natural and something that I should have to work with and be pleasant with, and around. So therefore, I was able to kind of take on that early transition and turn it into something that was inherently part of something I liked and that I found to be natural, and therefore enabled me to become a very resilient person. And that was what I was going for. And explaining that story was that ultimately just going through many early changes in my life led me to become a resilient person, and thus probably developing a personality that was going to be a very natural one fit for entrepreneurship. But basically at that time, when I did arrive in Texas, I will admit it was challenging at first. It was because I couldn't speak English. I did encounter a lot of bullies that would question why I spoke with an accent at the time, why I didn't speak with certain terminology that Texans loved. Now I do. Now I do definitely say y'all. I definitely understand how it's much more efficient than you all. Yep. But at the time, definitely was teased. I was just 10 after all in Plano, Texas. And then that's when I started really turning to movies and TV and radio to not only learn from, but be inspired by. And so that's why at that time, I would learn how to speak English by watching TV shows like Friends and I Love Lucy. I would listen to the radio, this DJ called Delilah.
Yes.
Are you familiar with her?
I am. She's great.
And I would learn from her. And then I would listen to audio tapes by Dale Carnegie in our little red minivan that we would drive around all day as I was going from lacrosse practice to Taekwondo practice after school. And so anyways, I ended up turning to all sorts of different media channels in order to learn how to speak English. That ultimately became also, as I mentioned, my inspiration. It became my biggest inspiration when I, as mentioned, saw Gilmore Girls and ended up from that wanting to apply to Yale, Legally Blonde, Harvard Business School. Dale Carnegie, I mentioned him. If the listeners today are not familiar with him, he's incredible. He wrote How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. He wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People. And ultimately, it was a big reason why to this day, every single day, at least one person in my life will turn to me and say, how are you so calm? With everything that we do, how am I such a calm person? If you end up looking up stories of Mogul, you'll see that very frequently I'm cited as a very calm leader. And it all has to do with my early years of listening to those Dale Carnegie tapes. So I loved that as a child. I loved listening to all of these, watching all of these. And I look forward to the day when I can share that with my future children.
Fantastic. And it sounds like, you were mentioning your grandmother earlier. It sounds like that you had a really great role model for innovation and breaking boundaries with your grandmother, who was one of the first women to drive a car in Vietnam. Did she remain an influence, or did you have other people directly in your life who helped you become resilient and who you looked up to?
She was definitely an influence. Just her story alone was what gave me so much inspiration early on and motivation and dedication, because I wanted to be just like her. But of course, I wouldn't be who I am today without my father, who was also, of course, influenced by my grandmother, her strength and her passion and her generosity and kindness and how much she was beloved by others impacted him, of course, to be that way as well as a man and to therefore raise very strong daughters. And so my father always taught us to fail forward. He was always telling us, if you're learning, it's okay. You're trying, you're learning. Fail fast, fail forward. And so we celebrated failing. I loved failing. I still love failing. And I encourage it too within the Mogul organization, always rapidly prototyping, iterating towards perfection over time. It's okay if it's not perfect at the beginning. It will get there. So be patient with yourself. It will get there. It'll be perfect. And so I have to credit my father on that.
Awesome. And also from your story, I can see where your interest in the arts and media and entertainment came from. TV and movies playing such a significant part in your childhood. But what led to your interest in the STEM fields and in engineering?
My interest in the STEM fields came from a combination of places. I believe at the time when I was in high school, my father was already encouraging me to look into Java books and HTML. He was an advisor at that time to a number of different technology companies or technology departments within media companies, for example. And as a result, it was very natural for us all at the dinner table to be talking about technology and to be familiar with the Java language and computer programming languages in general. But what happened was at that time, it was still pretty challenging for me. And I wasn't paying too much close attention to it until one day, and this is probably what's key, I actually had a project to work on. And I think that's what's key. If anyone listening today is interested in learning how to code, it's really, really important that you find a project that you're passionate about so that no matter what obstacle you encounter, you overcome it. You find that way to push through because you're so excited about what you're completing. So at that time, when I was just kind of puttering around with it and kind of reading different pages from these books that my father would hand me, it wasn't interesting enough for me to actually be able to push through. So what made the difference was when I ended up reaching out to this singer-songwriter named Carrie Kimmel, who is actually therefore credited as being my first boss ever. And I was 14 years old at the time, this burgeoning singer-songwriter who nowadays, years later, has written over 200 songs for TV and film, including many of the theme songs that we listen to today on TV, from Grey's Anatomy to The Hills and many more across channels, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, if you watch that show. So she's incredible, such a prolific songwriter. And at the time, I was a huge fan. I wasn't the only one. Taylor Swift even was a big fan, apparently. And anyways, I'd write to her and I offered her my time and energy. I said, if she had any job at all, I'd love to help her. And the one thing she needed help on was managing her website. So as a result, I basically ended up learning HTML skills from that and ended up as a result of that becoming the webmaster for the Yale Students Association for Asian Americans. It was called the Asian American Students Alliance, ASA. And that actually is a big part of the story that I didn't even mention. It's part of the reason why I became part of the school newspaper later on, was because I ended up joining that Students Alliance for Asian Americans at Yale. And one day the school newspaper printed a racist cartoon. And I ended up seeing that the one way in which I could make this major change at the school newspaper was from joining Inside Out and making that change inside out. Therefore, perhaps they printed that cartoon because they lacked a diverse staff. So anyways, I think you can see from many of the things I'm sharing that there's many threads along the way that led me to where we are today. Because then from that Yale newspaper, it led me to doing what we do at Mogul today, something I haven't mentioned yet, which is that we provide companies as a way to create even further impact on women worldwide. We partner with them to gain access to our platform to post jobs and internships so that ultimately they can enhance diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And that simultaneously, of course, provides major value back to our user base as they now get the top picks of jobs all around the world from thousands of companies, especially over 1,000 companies, over 20,000 companies globally that ultimately now want our women in their workplace and can create an impact in this way.
Wow. So Mogul has just an incredible reach. And I've seen your website. I've used the platform. I just see all the different ways that you're trying to really help women holistically in all parts of their life and career. How do you see Mogul evolving over the next few years?
Thank you so much for those kind words. Well, definitely, I think you'll see Mogul continue evolving in two main ways, or three. First is continued global impact. So that means even though we're accessed every single day by all 196 countries and over 35,000 cities around the world, you'll see us continuing to expand globally, expanding our reach across Europe, Asia, Africa, South America. Since 20 million women overall that we reached abroad just doesn't compare to the overall 3 billion women that there are out there, of course. So we are going to be continuing to reach abroad and expanding there. Also, you'll see us, as a result, continuing to strengthen our presence across mobile. Right now, we are accessed 80% of the time via mobile. But you'll see us continuing enhancing our offerings through mobile, and that will therefore mean you'll see a mobile app launching within the next few weeks to our user base and then subsequently globally. And then finally, you'll see us continuing to work to provide users access to softwares and tools that will, again, continue to help them in a holistic way, just as you described earlier. Ways in which, therefore, they'll be able to accelerate themselves personally, professionally, through job opportunities, through education, finding resources through Mogul that will help them in every way possible become the best version of themselves.
Yeah. And I'm absolutely seeing the meaning of the word mogul. And we tend to think of a mogul. We tend to think of a very, rich, established man. But it sounds like you're really reclaiming that word for women.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up. It totally was one of the reasons why we named this organization Mogul, was because back when we started Mogul, the number one search result for it was successful businessman. And if you looked at the first 6 pages of search results, it was Warren Buffett, Donald Trump, Rupert Murdoch. But today, if you Google the word mogul, we are the number one search result. Wow. So we have helped to redefine that word for the next generation of girls to know that they can be moguls too. And that is perhaps one of our proudest feats to date.
Wow, that's just incredible. It's amazing what you've been able to achieve in such a relatively short amount of time, and the future is wide open. So excited to see how things continue to develop with you and with Mogul as well.
Thank you so much.
As you're looking and reflecting back on your career journey so far, what would you say have been the most significant things that you've learned about yourself along the way?
Well, one really great thing I think I've learned about myself is that I have a really bad short-term memory, which is actually perfect for an entrepreneur, because if you hear no's along the way, it's amazing forgetting that no instantly. I forget no's right away. You could tell me a billion no's right now, and the next thing I would try to hear is a yes. And the second I hear that yes, I latch onto it and I keep on going with that yes. And that's been really amazing to see from myself, that I can hear those no's, but I will forget them and I will hear that yes instead. And I think I've learned also that I'm not extroverted as I thought I once was. Mm-hmm. I think when I was in college, I knew I was a shy student in college and Harvard Business School, but by the second year, I usually turned more gregarious and more extroverted once I kind of got settled in past that first year. It kind of always took me about a year in a new situation to fully settle in. Mm-hmm. And I felt now increasingly, though, that I went from therefore believing that I was an extrovert to then actually finding that I was probably at the end of the day a gregarious introvert. And that was probably one of the biggest discoveries I've made for myself. And maybe, I don't know if it was the entrepreneurship path and overall lifestyle that maybe turned me into that, as opposed to that I was that all along. But anyways, whatever the case, that is what I am today. So that's been something significant to learn too. So what it means is that basically I really enjoy time to myself, but at the same time, when I am around others, like I'm very happy and excited, but time alone to myself is really energizing too.
And I think it's important for people to hear that successful entrepreneurs can be introverts too. I think that's wonderful that you've realized that about yourself. So in addition to all the other amazing things that you're working on, you're also an author, and you've got a brand new book that just came out in September called You Are a Mogul. Can you tell me a little bit about why you wrote that book and what it's about?
Sure. Well, every single time I speak at conferences or events or meet our users out in the streets, they would tell me that by learning my story, they had drawn so much inspiration that they were able to overcome challenges and obstacles that they never thought would be possible to overcome. And so I would just always remember how much these incredible young women that I would meet would tell me that if they could just learn even more of my story, they felt like they could even do even more. And as a result, I started capturing kind of the gems of what I was sharing in speeches or at events, the gems that people would come up to me and especially highlight as their favorite part of that event or that favorite thing that they've ever learned. And I started capturing it, every single gem, every time, then compiling hundreds and essentially then realizing that this was a very comprehensive resource to provide to others. And so over the course of 3 years, I wrote this book.
Wonderful. And so how can people get in touch to either buy your book or to learn more about Mogul?
Well, they should definitely go to one of their bookstores, local bookstores. Definitely encourage that. Mogul, we love our local bookstores. In fact, every single anniversary since the start of Mogul, every year we take the whole entire company out to our local Barnes & Noble, and we actually literally send everyone on an unlimited shopping spree to continue celebrating education. So it's really something that we cherish. So definitely everyone should go out to the local bookstores, pick up a copy of Your Mogul there, or else if they do happen to be nowhere nearby a local bookstore, then please do go online to Amazon or Barnes & Noble there and hopefully pick up a copy of Your Mogul there. But first and foremost, excited about getting a chance to connect with every single one of our users or our future readers, those who are inspired by your Mogul. So please feel free to follow me on Mogul or Instagram at Tiffany Pham or Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and more.
Perfect. And I'll put links to your social media accounts as well as a link to Mogul and more about your book in the show notes so that people can refer to it there as well.
Great.
As we close out today, is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know or any other things that they can help or support you with?
I hope our listeners just take the time to read this book and hopefully feel inspiration from it and realize that every single lesson that they learn along the way, that they can apply it to their lives today, and that hopefully as they do, they'll realize that anything is possible, and that impossible thing they thought could never be achievable is in fact achievable, and that therefore they can do it and they can do it now.
Fantastic advice. A great way to close out the podcast. Well, Tiffany, thank you so much for being my guest. It was just amazing and wonderful to hear your story of resilience and learning and trying different things and how that can really blossom into an amazing career.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Really wonderful speaking with you.
Thanks for listening to Beyond 6 Seconds. Please help us spread the word about this podcast. Share it with a friend. Give us a shout out on your social media or write a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player. You can find all of our episodes on our website, www.beyond6seconds.com. Until next time.